Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Brian parked his car in front of his house, just like he did every day, but something felt different in his chest this time. There was no rain, no thunder, no sign of any tragedy, it was just an ordinary night. Maybe that was the hardest part, how normal everything seemed right before things fall apart. He turned off the engine and stayed there for a few moments with his forehead against the steering wheel, trying to shake off the week's exhaustion. Work had been rough, with tight deadlines and endless arguments with demanding clients, and all he wanted was to go inside, take a quick shower, and lie down next to Jennifer, his wife of almost 10 years. Then he noticed a different car parked in front of the garage. It was a dark sedan, clean, with tinted windows. He'd never seen it before. Brian had this habit of checking out the cars on the street when he arrived, ever since he'd nearly been hit once by someone backing out without looking. So he found the car odd but didn't think anything unusual was going on. Maybe it was a neighbor's visitor. Maybe Jennifer had invited someone over. Could be friends from work. She'd always been sociable, easygoing, open to friendships. Still feeling drained, he grabbed his house key and walked to the front door. As he opened it, something felt off, like an invisible tension lingering in the air, as if a conversation was happening and he'd arrived too early. He set his briefcase down by the console table, dropped his keys with a slight jingle on top of it, and heard laughter. Two voices. One male, one female. Hers. Jennifer always had a distinct laugh, almost musical, and he'd learned to love it over the years. Normally it would comfort him, but right then it did the opposite. The tone of that laugh was too free. Too intimate. Coming from the living room, those sounds didn't feel like casual coworkers talking, but two people in perfect sync, sharing more than just words. Brian walked slowly toward the main room of the house. His gaze traveled down the hallway until he saw an image that would stay clear in his mind for who knew how long. Jennifer was sitting next to a man he recognized right away, Daniel Miller, a coworker of hers. Jennifer's body was slightly leaning toward him. Her legs were crossed, her smile was relaxed, and her hand was resting on the back of the couch near Daniel's shoulder. He was also smiling, as though nothing was wrong. There was a strong but silent connection between them, the kind that screams just as loud as any argument. Brian stopped. Time didn't slow down. Nothing fell. Nobody jumped up in a hurry. Jennifer simply turned her head when she noticed him, and her smile disappeared so fast it made his stomach drop. Daniel, caught off guard, looked at Brian with the discomfort of someone who knew he'd been found out. But nobody tried to explain, nobody ran to say, "It's not what it looks like." Because what Brian saw was exactly what it looked like. It was exactly what he was afraid of. Jennifer's eyes met his, but they didn't find the patient man she knew. They found someone who was just exhausted. Without drama, without asking questions or explanations, Brian lifted his left hand to his wedding ring. The gesture was precise, almost automatic. He pulled off the gold band he'd worn since the day he said, "I do," and held it for a few seconds. He'd always imagined that if he was ever betrayed, cheated on, replaced, he'd feel rage. But what came over him was numbness. It was like his entire body got covered in an invisible layer of ice. His heart was still beating, but it felt far away. He was breathing, but couldn't really feel the air going in and out. With calm steps, he moved to the coffee table, where they'd left wine glasses, books, even birthday cards so many times. He held out his hand and set the ring down. The sound of the metal hitting the glass was louder than any words could have been. Jennifer, still frozen, opened her mouth to say something, but Brian didn't give her the chance. He didn't apologize, didn't yell, didn't point fingers. He just turned around and walked toward the door. He left without looking back. And as he crossed the threshold of the house, something inside him left too, like part of his identity stayed behind, along with his dreams, his plans, and the image of a happy marriage. Right there, a chapter ended that he never wanted to close. And a pain began that he still couldn't measure. Brian drove aimlessly for hours. Every street looked the same, and even though traffic lights changed colors and cars honked at him, nothing truly snapped him out of that daze. It felt like the world was still moving normally while he remained frozen on the inside. That scene in the living room kept replaying in his head, over and over, like a nightmare that refuses to go away. Jennifer smiling at Daniel. Their intimacy. The lack of surprise. It wasn't just betrayal, it was disregard. Night had already fallen when he pulled up at a small roadside motel. The neon sign was blinking with a short circuit, and the parking lot was almost empty. He stepped into the lobby with a blank stare and asked for a room. He paid in advance, went upstairs, tossed his phone on the nightstand, and collapsed on the bed without even taking off his shoes. His body was drained, but his mind kept spinning. He woke up in the middle of the night with his heart racing and a cold sweat, like he'd been wrenched out of a nightmare. He sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, trying to figure out where he was. In his head, Jennifer's voice still echoed, not in a literal way, but as a distant noise. He thought about how everything had changed so quickly. Just that week, they were talking about where to go on vacation. And now, there was silence, betrayal, and an emptiness he couldn't quite put into words. Unable to go back to sleep, he went down to the front desk and asked if there was someplace nearby to grab a coffee. The clerk pointed him to a 24-hour diner on the corner. He walked there, hands in his pockets and shoulders heavy. He went in, picked a table far from everyone else, and ordered a black coffee. He just sat there, staring at the cup like it might answer all the questions burning inside him. That's when an older woman with gray hair and watchful eyes came over. She didn't ask his name or what had happened. She just started talking, as if she already knew he needed someone to listen. She said her name was Martha, and she stopped by every night after visiting her husband at the nursing home. He doesn't even remember who I am anymore, she told him. But I still go. Because love isn't just what we feel, it's what we choose to do, even when the other person forgets. Brian listened in silence, but he felt something loosen inside him. For the first time since leaving home, he felt like he wasn't sinking on his own. Martha didn't ask what was hurting him, she just stayed there, steady, like a lighthouse in the fog. At the end of their conversation, she said something that kept echoing in his mind: sometimes when you lose everything, you discover what you never really had. And it hurts. But it also sets you free. The next morning, Brian went back to his room, took a long shower, and stood in front of the mirror for a good while. The reflection was familiar but looked older somehow, as if he'd aged overnight. Facing his pain had changed him. And though he still felt anger, hurt, and confusion, there was also a thin thread of clarity running through it all. He knew he had to go back. Not to reconcile. Not to hear apologies. But to look Jennifer in the eyes and see, without a doubt, who she really was. Hours later, he parked in front of the house again. Same sidewalk, same door. But everything felt different now, like time had raced forward in just a couple of days. Jennifer was sitting on the porch steps, like she'd been waiting for him all night. When she saw him, she stood quickly, eyes red, and walked toward him with hesitant steps. She tried to hug him, but Brian stepped back. He wanted to hear what she had to say, but he didn't want any physical contact. He needed to keep his composure, to stay clear-headed. They sat down, with distance between them. She started talking, stumbling over words, saying she was sorry, that it was a mistake, that she didn't know what she was doing. But something about the way she spoke bothered him even more than the betrayal itself. It was how she used her words like a shield, more worried about the fallout than about what she had done. Brian just listened. And the more she talked, the more he understood, this wasn't regret. It was fear. Fear of losing comfort, the image of a perfect marriage, control. She didn't want him back. She wanted the stability he represented. And in that moment, Brian realized that the woman sitting in front of him wasn't the same person anymore. Or maybe she never was. Now he could finally see it. Brian stayed awake all that night. Even though the house was quiet, his body felt on high alert. Every heartbeat reminded him of the weight of the decision he'd made. Watching Jennifer leave with her suitcases, rushing out the door with frustration in her eyes, was more than an ending. It was a release. For years, he'd been the one holding everything up to keep the marriage going, even when the reciprocity, truth, and genuine commitment were gone. Now that she was out of the house, he could breathe differently. Not better, just less suffocated. The next morning, still sitting at the kitchen table, his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen for a moment. It was Jennifer. He thought about ignoring it. He'd done that before. But something about her insistence felt different this time. The phone kept ringing for a few more seconds before he answered, more on impulse than desire. Her voice on the other end was quieter. Tired. Almost defeated. Brian. I'm not calling to try to come back. Or to justify what I did. He said nothing, waiting for her to continue. I know I hurt you. And you have every right to hate me. But there's something I need to get off my chest, it's eating me alive. Brian didn't speak. He was gripping the phone like squeezing it might control whatever was coming. Jennifer took a deep breath, hesitated, and then said, Daniel, he wasn't just with me. He's also with Sarah. Kevin's wife. Her words hit Brian like a blade. He went silent. His mind struggled to piece together names, situations, memories. Sarah. Kevin Clark's wife. His boss. His closest friend, at work and outside of it. Someone who visited his home. Who shared advice, jokes, even family trips. I found out a few weeks ago, but I only faced it now. And part of me wanted to hide it. Pretend it wasn't happening. But I can't. It's like a knot inside me, and the only way out is to tell the truth, even if it's too late. Her voice shook. It wasn't yelling or drama, just guilt, the kind that eats at you quietly. She didn't sound like she was trying to manipulate anything this time. She sounded tired of carrying it alone. Brian got up slowly, like the floor had become unsteady. He walked over to the window and stared at the front yard, but his thoughts were miles away. He tried to recall every time he'd seen Kevin and Sarah together, all the stories Kevin told so proudly about their marriage, the family photos on the desk at work. Was Daniel really involved with her too? Is that what Jennifer was saying? I know what you might think, that I'm telling you this out of revenge or spite. But I swear it's not that. I wish someone had warned me sooner. And I can't keep pretending this was only about me. Brian listened, still not saying a word. Her words echoed in slow motion inside his head. A new kind of anger was building, not just toward Jennifer or Daniel, but toward the twisted layers of deceit they were all caught in without realizing. It was like waking up in an emotional maze where every path led to the same conclusion: nobody was who they seemed to be. Jennifer ended in a faint voice, "Do whatever you want with this. I just had to get it off my chest. I've caused enough pain already. Now it's on you." Then she hung up. Brian stood there for minutes, the phone still pressed to his ear, even after the call ended. He could feel his blood pumping too fast, as if his body was reacting before his brain could catch up. The pieces were shifting. What he'd been through in the last few days was only the surface. Underneath, it was much bigger, much uglier. And now, knowing was no longer a choice. It was a responsibility. Brian knew he had to talk to Kevin. He couldn't just keep this to himself, like the news was some trivial piece of gossip. Sarah, the same woman Daniel was involved with, was married to the only real friend Brian felt he had left. Someone who trusted him with vulnerabilities, marital troubles, worries about his young son, and even plans to expand the company together. This hurt worse than his own betrayal. It meant the rot didn't stop at his own door, it spread like poison. All day long, Brian rehearsed what to say. He thought about how to bring it up, where to start, whether to blurt it all out at once or ease Kevin into it. But nothing seemed right. Nothing could soften the blow he knew his friend would feel. It wasn't just a delicate topic, it was an abyss. And he'd be pushing his friend right into it. That evening, he texted Kevin saying they needed to talk in person. Kevin replied within minutes, telling him to come over. He was home alone. Sarah had gone out to have dinner with a friend, he said. Brian couldn't help but notice how suspicious everything sounded now. But he didn't comment. He grabbed his car keys, took a deep breath, and headed out. When he arrived, Kevin greeted him with a tired but genuine smile. He was wearing an old baseball t-shirt and holding a soda can. "You look terrible, man. What's going on?" Brian didn't answer right away. He sat down, eyes fixed on a random spot, trying to gather the courage to say what he had to. Kevin moved closer, concerned, and pushed him to speak. "Talk to me." That's when Brian said it straight out. "Daniel, he's with Sarah." The words landed like a stone in the middle of the room. Kevin's face went pale. First he let out a short laugh, as if it was too absurd to be true. Then his expression changed. The laugh vanished, and his eyes locked onto Brian's, searching for confirmation. Brian just nodded once, slowly, firmly. Kevin stood up. He paced back and forth, running his hand over his face like he was trying to wake up from a nightmare. "Are you sure?" His voice sounded small, almost childlike. "Who told you?" Brian hesitated, but then told him everything Jennifer had said, how she revealed it, how she sounded, the guilt instead of anger or revenge. Kevin dropped onto the couch like his body had shut down. He stayed there, staring at the floor, then started talking. He said that for a few weeks, he'd felt something was off. Sarah was colder, more distant. She stopped replying to texts in the middle of the day, started going out more often, always with excuses ready. But he never pushed it. He thought it was just work stress, everyday wear and tear. Now everything made sense. It all lined up with a cruel perfection. After several minutes of silence, Kevin got up, grabbed his phone, and called Sarah. It went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Nothing. Brian stood by quietly. Seeing his friend go through the same pain he had was like reliving it, but worse, because now he was a witness, not just a victim. That hurt even more. Kevin threw his phone aside, picked up his car keys, and said he had to go. Brian grabbed his arm. "What are you gonna do?" Kevin just said, "I'm gonna sort it out." Brian tried to stop him. He warned him that once you expose something like this, you can't take it back. But Kevin was set on it. "She lied to me, Brian. She used me. She looked me in the eye and lied. I need to see the truth for myself." It was pointless to argue. Brian made a decision. "If you're going, I'm going with you." Before long, they were both in the car, driving across town in silence. Kevin's jaw was clenched, his fingers tight around the steering wheel. Brian looked out the window, but he was focused on every little detail around them. He knew this moment was going to change everything. And when they arrived, the scene they found was as cruel as it was inevitable. Sarah and Daniel were walking into a motel together. They were close, chatting, laughing. As if their world was perfectly intact. As if they hadn't destroyed anything. Kevin slammed on the brakes, jumped out, and marched toward them. Brian followed, tense. Daniel spotted them first. He froze. Sarah turned right after. Her smile vanished. "How many times?" Kevin asked quietly, but his voice was weighted. Sarah didn't answer. Daniel tried to intervene, but Kevin pushed him aside, not violently, just firmly. Kevin's eyes were filled with tears. But there was no yelling, only pain. "How many times?" he repeated. Sarah hesitated, looked at the ground, and admitted, like she saw no point in hiding anymore, "More times than I can count." That broke Kevin. He took off his wedding ring, stared at it for a few seconds, then threw it on the ground. He turned around, got back in his car, and drove off without saying another word. Brian followed quietly. Their pain was now mutual. Two men betrayed by the same mistakes, the same people, the same silence. On the drive back, Kevin finally spoke. "It's funny how we live thinking we know someone. Then the truth comes out, and we realize we never really knew them at all." Brian didn't answer. That sentence said it all. Months went by after that night. The dust settled, but the wreckage remained. Everyone just went their separate ways as best they could. Jennifer and Sarah both moved out, quietly, with no farewells or promises. The divorces were handled quickly, with no resistance, as if even they realized there was nothing left to fight for. What had existed was long gone before the truth came out. Brian decided to stay in the same house. He thought about selling it and starting fresh somewhere else, but he chose to face his own history. Every corner of that place held memories and pain, but also real moments, and he didn't want to be the kind of man who ran away from what he'd lived. He replaced some furniture, donated other pieces, opened up some space. Literally. It was like changing the house helped him rearrange the pieces inside himself. Over time, the house stopped being where he'd been betrayed. It became the place where he rediscovered himself. Kevin threw himself into a busy routine. He focused more on work and on his son. In those first few months, the two of them hung out often, sometimes just to share the silence, have a beer, or sit in the backyard and let time pass. Their friendship, already strong, only got stronger. They became something rare, two men who supported each other at their worst moments and came out the other side in one piece. One night, they were on Brian's porch, just chatting about random stuff, when Kevin got a notification on his phone. He read the message, frowned, then let out a humorless laugh, like he'd seen too much to be surprised anymore. "You won't believe this," he said. "Daniel, he's seeing another married woman. Again." Brian, who was holding a bottle in his hand, looked over, not surprised. He shook his head and muttered, "Daniel is a real piece of work." Kevin added, without much thought, his tone more bitter than angry, "But the married woman who agrees to that, she's even worse." They both went quiet for a moment. There wasn't any hatred in those words, just a realization. They'd learned the hard way that the problem isn't always just the one who betrays, it's also the one who goes along with it, who chooses to live in lies. And in that shared silence, there was more wisdom than in all those years of relationships. The pain was gone, the scars remained, but now they served as reminders of who they were, what they deserved, and what they would never again accept. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.